Hey everybody, welcome to the video. We're going to be talking about psychedelics today, and it's really important to understand that the way we speak about psychedelics is our way. There are going to be a lot of context that people will bring to you. They'll tell you psychedelics are this or psychedelics are not this. We're talking to you from a contextual space so that you know what we're talking about. And if anyone challenges your ideas around what psychedelics are, just simply tell them, ask them, hey, are you open to hearing my perspective and vantage point so that we can have some overlap and understanding of what we're talking about. So this is why we did this video. This is not law. This is where we're moving from. And this is the space that we operate from. So let's get into it. And before we get into it, I'd really like to just stop for a moment and let you know that we do not condone nor encourage the illegal or illicit purchase, sale, or use of any substances of any sort, not just psychedelics. We do not condone, encourage the illegal or illicit purchase, sale, or use of any substances. So I just want to make that really, really clear. This is not an encouragement space. This is an educational space. So let's move on. So what does psychedelic mean? And it was a term that was coined by this amazing guy named Dr. Humphrey Osmond, and he took two Greek words, psyche, meaning mind, and delos, meaning manifesting. And there are different renditions again of what these two words mean. This is the place that we rock from. So psyche is mind and delos is manifesting. So psychedelic literally means mind manifesting. And these substances, the psychedelic substances that cause altered states, get us in a place where we can actually manifest from the mind space. And we talk about mind versus brain in our programs. So psychedelics are a class of psychoactive substances that produce altered states of consciousness. Okay? Altered states of consciousness. That means outside of the day-to-day, your normal waking state, with unusual alterations in mood, perceptions, and thought or cognition. Right? So there are unusual alterations in mood. Some people may be euphoric in psychedelics. Some people may get a little sad. Some people may get angry. There are alterations in mood because psychedelics bring things to the surface. Perception, how you perceive things, can change and we'll talk about how psychedelics affect the default mode network, which is where we store our programs. Right? Our programs are the default ways that we see things, the default way that we function, the way we believe things. Our constructs are all in the default space, and when you go into psychedelic spaces, we actually dismantle the default mode, and so we can think things, we can perceive things in different ways. So psychedelics may or may not be hallucinogenic, and there's debate on this. And for me, there is no debate within myself. I've experienced psychedelics and I've had no hallucinations. My first year experiencing psychedelics, I had no hallucinations at all. I had no visual effects, nothing. And so it depends on the person, it depends on the situation, it depends on the substance. So they may or may not be hallucinogenic. And psychedelics may also, even if they are hallucinogenic, if they are taken in a small enough of an amount, they will not produce hallucinations for most people. And then again, if they're taken in really small amounts, for some people they may. And so that's the difference between micro, mini, macro doses and mega doses. And we have that in another video as well. So psychedelics are often associated with deeply spiritual, life-changing experiences, rites of passage, and healing. And this is why we believe that psychedelics are coming into vogue so heavily right now, is because there's a lot of spiritual shifting on the planet. There's a lot of life-changing experiences. There's a rite of passage from the way humanity is right now moving into the next space. And people are utilizing psychedelics for healing. And psychedelics there are hundreds of different types of psychedelics. I dare say thousands. And, they've been around forever. These are things that come with the planet, and people have used them for healing. So I want to keep that in mind as we move forward. Psychedelics have been used for thousands of years and in just about every culture on Earth. Every culture on Earth. This is a big place, and psychedelics have been restricted for quite some time since the 60s. The war on drugs started happening in the 60s and 70s, and there started to be this blockade on psychedelics worldwide. And so the amount of psychedelic usage in the forefront of society kind of fell back, and now it's coming back to the surface. And so if you could imagine 1,000 years ago, there wasn't even half the amount of people on the planet that there are now. Not even close to half. And so we're at 7.7 billion as of this recording, probably about 7.7 billion people. And the amount of people that can shift, that can utilize psychedelics to shift themselves, we could change our whole planet and how we interact with one another. There are literally hundreds of psychedelic substances, and I know I mentioned this earlier, maybe even thousands. So they're utilized and researched with benefits with addiction, depression, PTSD, and anxiety. Now there's psychedelic psychotherapy in progress right now. There's all kinds of therapy for addiction. The uses for psychedelics are just increasing. And as we do more research, as people start to experiment with things and study themselves and one another, we're finding more and more uses for psychedelics. So let's talk a little bit about what we call the classic psychedelics. Classic psychedelics affect the serotonin system. And serotonin is what we call a neurotransmitter. And a neurotransmitter is a chemical that the body creates to move impulses from one part of the nervous system to the next, right? And so when I touch something, there's a signal that goes in through the nerves, the sensory receptors on my fingers, on my skin, up into the nerves, up into my central nervous system, which is the top of the central nervous system is the brain, and things happen. And so the way we transfer the impulses is through neurotransmitters, and serotonin is one of them. And serotonin is responsible for a lot of different impulses, including a sort of connected happiness type of feeling, and it affects sleep cycles, hunger cycles, and all of these different things. So the classic psychedelics are often referred to as tryptamines. I call these naturals the ones that grow on that aren't reproduced in laboratories, the things that grow in plants and animals. I call them naturals. They're often called entheogens. So let's talk about a few entheogens. Psilocybin is a substance that is found in what we would call shrooms or magic mushrooms. It's also found in truffles and some other substances, and some other things that grow on the planet, right? And psilocybin is a fungi, right? And it's mycelial based, and it grows out of the ground. And so mescaline, we have mescaline. Mescaline is another psychoactive substance that's often found in cacti like peyote and wachuma. Then we have what we would call spirit molecules, and they're natural as well. They're also entheogens. And we have DMT, and we have 5-MeO-DMT. DMT is found in just about every living organism on this planet. And we can derive it from tons of species, right? And it's in humans, it's in animals, and it is what we would call a spirit molecule, or some people would call it the God molecule. And then there's 5-MeO-DMT, which is not the same thing. It often gets confused for it. It is not the same thing. And so I invite you to do your research on it. Once again, this is an overview. I'm not going to get too sciencey and dive too deep into these things. 5-MeO-DMT is found in a lot of different plants, and it's found in a Bufo alvaris. And Bufo is a reptile, right? It's a frog. And so this is where people we use the venom from it. It's smoked, and we go off into the realms. I'll leave it there. Do your research on that, okay? And if you're interested, we can do deeper videos on it. Let us know. Then we have ayahuasca brews. Ayahuasca brews are very, very special. It's used in Andean cultures in South America, and it's known for its really, really potent effects. And it's actually a mix of two different plant situations. Banisteriopsis capi and Psychotria viridis. And so the latter contains DMT, and DMT is the psychoactive molecule. Again, we call that the God molecule. And what an MAO is called a monoamine oxidase. And monoamine oxidase is an enzyme in the body that breaks down neurotransmitters and things like DMT, right? And so when you mix these two together, the MAOI, the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, stops monoamine oxidase from breaking down the DMT, so the experience is actually longer. And so I just wanted to bring that to the attention space so that people can get a little bit of an understanding of how that works. It's an amazing substance, and people have huge transformations in the ayahuasca space. Iboga or iboga, it's derived from a bush from Africa, from spaces in Africa. It interacts with many brain systems. It interacts with serotonin receptors, opioid receptors, sigma receptors, which regulate neurotransmitters in the broad span of neurotransmitters, glutamate receptors, and nicotinic receptors. And that's nicotinic receptors are the receptors for nicotine. So iboga is really, really great for navigating spaces with substance where people are chemically and physically addicted to substances. It affects all of these areas of the nervous system, of the brain, so that a person can structure themselves outside of that addiction, that addiction space. And the results that people have gotten with iboga is tremendous. So we have synthetics, and synthetics come in many forms. They're recreated in laboratories, or they're created in laboratories in the first place. And we have MDMA. These are just a few, okay? There are hundreds of these things. So I'm just listing the ones that you may have heard of before, that are being utilized in clinical studies, that are being utilized recreational and in ceremonial spaces. MDMA, MDA, which is also known as SAS or sassafras, 2CB, 2CA, GHB, which in the past has been known as the date rape drug. And empathogens tend to give a feeling of empathy, right? Like, I know you, I love you. People feel very lovey and very connected in an empathogenic space. They have very, very special ways, particularly MDMA has a very, very special way of affecting the serotogenic system, and it's quite profound when used with talk therapy and psychedelic psychotherapy. Then we have lysergamides, and lysergamides are what we would call ergoline derivatives. And ergolines come from what we would call ergot, and ergot is a fungus that grows on rye, right? Like you make rye bread. It grows on rye, and this is where we derive LSD and LSA. And LSD is called lysergic acid diethylamide, and you may have heard some people say, I'm going to drop acid. This is what LSD is. And LSD, for us here, the way we work and the places we move, it's a very mind-based situation, lots of hallucinations, and there's a time commitment to LSD. So those are the classic psychedelics. And before we wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about dissociatives. And dissociatives they're coming into play. There's a very big surge of ketamine right now, right? And so the question comes up, is a dissociative actually a psychedelic? If someone's hallucinating, if someone's having a change in their mood, an alteration in their patterns of thinking and their cognition, is this a psychedelic, or is it just a dissociative? And so people tend to dissociate or depending on the dose of dissociatives, and it can bring a person into that type of space. So dissociatives have been roped into the discussion with psychedelics, and I think that the conversation is very, very pertinent and very, very valid. And so there are people who are psychedelic purists who will not talk about ketamine at all because it is not a classic psychedelic. And I think that leaves a lot of room for people to experiment without any support and systems around what they're doing, and they can fall into spaces of needing integration. And I believe that that's one of the issues right now that Cole and I see, is that people are not integrating their ketamine experiences. They're going to clinics, they're having ketamine, they're getting results, and they're not integrating it, so they're going back to the same thing. And then there are people who have had traumatic circumstances in their lives, and they've dissociated, and then they have issues. So dissociatives have been shown to have amazing benefits for PTSD, addiction, depression, anxiety, really, really wonderful stuff, right? They distort sensory perceptions. They do cause feelings of disconnection or detachment from the environment itself. And so when one can feel detachment or perceive detachment from everything, they can see things in a different way. They can perceive things in a different way and rewire their brain. And this is a really important thing to consider when you're working in expanded spaces, is the dissociative space. Dissociatives, again, must be used with caution, particularly people with dissociative tendencies. People who've had extremely traumatic circumstances, PTSD, been around bombs, been raped, been stabbed. All of these types of things can cause a person to actually literally and figuratively leave their body. And that can be a pattern for a person to dissociate. And if you put a dissociative person who is dissociative by habit into a dissociative space, one, they may not feel or experience anything. Two, they may dissociate even further and drive the habit in deeper. So I advise anyone who's watching this, who's leaning into, integration practices or any type of expanded space, be mindful of dissociative situations, be that in ketamine or any other psychedelic that would cause a person to dissociate. It's a really interesting space. So just be mindful of that. It's important to evaluate a person's adaptations when prior to any state-altering substance. I just said that. So ketamine is what I was talking about a few minutes ago, and ketamine is a glutamate receptor antagonist, right? And it's really sciencey, right? A glutamate receptor antagonist. And so glutamate is one of the main excitatory neurotransmitters in humans, right? And so to break that down, an excitatory neurotransmitter is something that draws up excitement. When a person gets excited, right? When excitement happens in the nervous system, glutamate is usually part of that. Right? It's a huge part of excitatory situations. It's huge in neuroplasticity, which is the plasticity, the elasticity of the nervous system. And it's involved in learning new things, and it's involved in memory function. So it's a really, really important space, the glutamate system. And glutamate is one of the most abundant amino acids in the body, and it's used to manufacture many proteins. Glutamate is everywhere in the body. And when I hear people talk about psychedelics, when I hear people talk about substances, when I hear people talk about transformation, all I hear is serotonin, serotonin, serotonin. And that's awesome. There's also glutamate. And when you're thinking about something like iboga, which also hits the glutamate pathway, traditional psychedelics there are traditional psychedelics that are hitting the glutamate pathway. So it's really, really important to consider the transformations that your people are having. So with that, we're going to wrap it up here. And psychedelics, there is so much to learn about psychedelics. I'm still learning. I will continue to learn, and I will continue to bring more and more information to you and all of the rest of the people that have been working with us. I invite you to get curious and get courageous. This is just kind of an underpinning of how we see psychedelics so that you understand where we're coming from when we speak about psychedelics. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Let's expand. Psychedelics are here to stay. They're here to stay, y'all. So please feel free to hit us up with any questions you have, any situations that are going on with the learning that you're having with us. And if you aren't working with us by any chance and you've gotten your hands on this video by some chance, and you're interested in diving deeper, please contact our team about any upcoming masterminds and workshops. We'd love to have you on board with us. We have so many tips and tools for people who are looking to integrate inside and outside of psychedelics. I love you so much. Thank you so much for your time, for your love, for your heart. And remember, integration is not optional. We are all integrating our information and our circumstances all the time. Are you aware of what you're integrating, and are you sovereign in your integration space? I love you so much. Thank you, and be free.
The Condor approach is a methodology. This is not a law space, not a religion, not a cult. This is not a space of indoctrination. It is a methodology. And we use the methodology of the Condor approach to integrate things in our lives. It's a tool belt. You have all of these tools that you use on a day-to-day basis, and we move through a psychedelic informed lens because it works. And there are a lot of people that are leaning into utilizing psychedelics, and they're not integrating with intention. Integration is something that's not optional, but it's something that's ongoing all the time. And if we don't do it with intention, we get what we get. So the question is, can you coach yourself, and can you be coached by somebody else? From our vantage point at the Condor approach, coaching is eliciting greatness from another person. It is supporting another person, bringing out the greatness in them. And so if you can coach somebody else, can you coach yourself? Bring the greatness out of you. Be coachable and have fun. If you fall out of having fun, things can get really, really challenging. So bring yourself back to fun at every instance that you possibly can, y'all.